The outbreak and global scope of the war. Siener van Rensburg saw a terrible and all-consuming global war spreading from Europe across continents. The war begins suddenly and escalates rapidly, catching many by surprise. He foresaw a great upheaval in Europe that acts as a trigger. A black serpent, symbolizing a secret plot or betrayal, moves stealthily across the continent. The war engulfs the entire world in fire and darkness. A large war cloud rises over Europe and soon after over the world. He sees nations rising against nations, alliances crumbling, and entire countries being plunged into destruction. The war is not only military but also economic, social, and spiritual. He saw it as a divine judgment on a world that had turned away from God. The role of Russia and Eastern Europe. Siener saw Russia launching a sudden and devastating assault into Western Europe. Russian troops moved swiftly and unexpectedly, catching the West unprepared. He saw them pushing into Germany, even reaching the Rhine River. Their advance is marked by brutality and fire. He describes columns of Russian tanks and massive troop movements, suggesting a full-scale military invasion. However, Russia's victory is short-lived. After initial success, the Russian forces are cut off and encircled, and ultimately defeated. Their downfall is sudden and complete. In one vision, he sees Russian soldiers lying like corn stalks after the harvest, a prophecy of mass casualties. He foresaw Russia's pride turned into ashes, and the nation brought low through divine judgment. Germany's revival and military rise. Siener saw Germany rising again, not just militarily but spiritually. Though humiliated after past wars, Germany becomes a surprising force of resistance and spiritual awakening. He saw a white horse emerging from Germany, symbolizing purity and divine mission. Germany plays a central role in resisting the Russian invasion, and is one of the nations that experiences a spiritual renewal amid war. In one vision, he saw a flame in the heart of Germany that spreads, a sign of revival. Despite suffering early in the war, Germany rises with new strength, becoming one of the main instruments in turning back the tide of evil. The role of Islam in the Middle East. Siener van Rensburg saw great unrest and bloodshed across the Middle East. In one vision, he saw a Turkish crescent rising over Europe, symbolizing betrayal and invasion. Turkey, once an ally, becomes a destroyer. He saw Islam rising in strength, causing chaos and persecution. In several visions, Muslim forces rise in Europe itself, leading to civil war-like conditions in France, Germany, and England. Siener foresaw massive fires in European cities, particularly in France, which burns from the inside out. He associated this with internal uprisings, possibly linked to immigrant populations. He also saw Israel surrounded and attacked, and the Middle East in flames. Yet he saw divine protection over Israel, and its survival in the face of annihilation. England and America's uncertain role. Siener van Rensburg gave cryptic but deeply symbolic visions concerning England and America. He saw England as a prostitute, having sold her soul for power. Her betrayal leads to her own ruin. He foresaw her sinking beneath the waves, possibly symbolizing total collapse or judgment. England is judged harshly for her moral corruption and alliances. America, in his visions, is strangely passive or missing in decisive moments. He saw fires and riots within America, suggesting internal collapse, economic ruin, or possibly civil war. He did not describe a victorious America in this war, but rather a nation brought low by its own sins and divisions. One of his most cryptic visions shows a dark cloud hovering over the United States, from which comes flashes of red lightning, a symbol of war or divine retribution. Yet he also saw a Christian remnant preserved within the USA. Destruction, nuclear fire, and plague. Siener described horrifying images of cities burning, bodies rotting in streets, and fire from the sky. He did not know the word nuclear, but his descriptions include explosions with blinding light, entire cities disappearing, and deadly winds, which may refer to nuclear weapons and fallout. He foresaw plagues and diseases sweeping through war-torn areas. In one vision, he saw people falling like flies, unable to be buried. He described yellow smoke and black skies, famine and water turning poisonous. These are symbols of chemical, biological, or nuclear warfare. He also warned of a terrible winter where many freeze to death, possibly following energy grid collapse or wartime infrastructure destruction. Internal revolutions and moral collapse. Before the global war, Siener foresaw civil unrest, racial tensions, and moral decay in many Western nations. He saw cities burning from internal rebellion, with neighbors turning against each other. He specifically described France and England in chaos, with internal civil wars, especially due to racial and religious division. He warned that modern culture would collapse not just economically but morally. Homosexuality, materialism, and abandonment of faith would lead to societal breakdown. He saw churches empty, families broken, and lawlessness spreading like fire. Divine intervention and the triumph of the faithful. Despite the destruction, Siener van Rensburg saw divine intervention. In the darkest hour, heavenly forces intervene. He described a bright white cross in the sky and a heavenly army rising up to defend the righteous. The war ends with a cleansing fire, not only physical but spiritual. He foresaw the preservation of small, faithful communities, especially in the countryside and in Christian nations that repented. South Africa, in his visions, plays a unique role as a place of refuge and rebirth, with a spiritual revival spreading from it after the war. At the end of the conflict, a new era of peace and righteousness begins, led by nations that return to Christ. The world is smaller, scarred, but purified. A Christian golden age follows, in which Christ is honored, and the remnant of the faithful rebuild civilization under God's rule.